Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Kelly Gilson, and I am the Executive Director with United Way Oxford, and it gives me great pleasure to be able to bring this Community United conversation on truth and reconciliation to our Oxford community and really begin, I think, some of our Oxford County journey to learning. I know we have a number of people that are just coming into the webinar now, and it is being recorded. And so while we are waiting for folks to get in and to get settled, as we do with every one of our Community United conversations, I would like to begin with the United Way Oxford's territorial acknowledgement, a land acknowledgement. And this matters always, and tonight even more than ever, of course. So we will begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the very beginning. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, as we gather here, there have been Indigenous peoples who have been the stewards of this place. In particular, we acknowledge the traditional territory of the Ananashbek, the Lenape, the Attawandaron, and the Haudenosaunee. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic and current contribution and connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions of the Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made and are making, both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and our province and country as a whole. As settlers, this recognition of the current contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular, to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across our country and in memory of the deceased children and survivors of the Indian residential schools. So that is something that we always reference when we begin our discussions together. And for those that aren't familiar, I'm in the United Way Oxford office, and we are in Woodstock, Oxford County, certainly here in Ontario. So thank you again for joining us. And for those who may not have been are familiar with our United Community Conversations, we have been doing these for a number of years. We record them, and they are a great learning tool. They're on our website, and people can reference them afterwards. And we're super grateful to Rogers Cable, who agreed to show them. And again, we say we want to shine a light on unignorable issues and really have these casual, comfortable conversations on a variety of topics, but to really bring awareness and understanding across our community to both the topics and the challenges and issues we may face, but also to the resources and supports and opportunities here in Oxford County. Very quickly, I will just share, of course, that United Way Oxford is 100% local. When we say local, we mean Oxford County. We raise funds to support the good work for social and human service programs that are vital to people's well-being, for programs that support people moving out of poverty, meeting their basic needs, building strong supports for mental health and addictions, and certainly helping families and children and youth thrive as they grow into adults. I think everyone can appreciate these are particularly challenging times for many to get by. We all feel it ourselves. Everyone knows the cost of living, the impact from the pandemic, sadly, the housing crisis, all of the crises are really causing grief for many of our friends, our families, our coworkers. And our role as the largest non-government funder of social services here in the county is to really work with our partners to make sure that those social supports are there to help individuals who truly need it, rely on it, and to try and help give them that helping hand. So that's a little bit about us. And I've told you a little bit about the goal of this series. And now I'm going to say thank you to our sponsor. So this evening's journey is thanks in part to Adam Shaw Professional Corporation for sponsoring this conversation. So Adam Shaw and Brent Mekatish committed to help fund it so that we can actually deliver this in a manner that we believe is going to be really helpful, not just to those that are at home watching or might be able to watch this afterwards on cable, but we know many of our workplace partners use it for the recordings for lunch and learns. And there's so many ways that this recording can help make a difference in awareness and understanding for folks. So thank you very much to our sponsors for making this possible. And the other group that I want to thank for making it possible are our panelists. So if I could certainly thank Gloria Thompson, Patricia Marshall, and Kim Parker, who will be appropriately introduced in just a moment, for their willingness to share their personal stories, their family stories, and their knowledge with all of us. I really want to say how humbled I am to be a part of this and how appreciative I am for your willingness to participate and to answer the call when we asked. And I know I speak on behalf of everyone listening that we are grateful that you're willing to share your journey with us. For folks at home, if you have questions, please type them into the chat box. It will be monitored and we will do our darndest to get to them. And we will also, thanks to Amanda, who's in the background doing all kinds of the hard, heavy lifting here, we will be sharing resources and supports and all kinds of different things as well. So if there's anything, just pay attention there. There might be a link or something that really catches your eye. And let me see, I think I'll just finalize my sort of opening housekeeping pieces, if you will, with if there's anything here that, because we will be sharing, our panelists will be sharing, sensitive information. And if anything triggers you and you're at home and this is unsettling, please look after you. That's the most important thing. And if you need, please feel free to step back or feel free to call, reach out if you need to connect with someone. So I just want to preface that. And now, before we go any further, I would like to actually officially begin our time together this evening by inviting Gloria Thompson, who's an elder and a knowledge keeper, to open our time together with a prayer. Gloria.
Kanshi Kiawao. Dishni Kashan Gloria Thompson. What I just said in the Michif language is good evening. Thank you for coming. My name is Gloria Thompson. I'm a proud Métis woman with roots in the Northwest and whose father, the Métis man, fled Manitoba and came to Ontario, where I was born and brought up. So I'm going to ask you to just assume an attitude of prayer. Take a nice deep breath and pray with me. Holy Creator, we are so grateful to be together tonight by the magic of Zoom. We are grateful to the United Way of Oxford, who have worked so hard to bring this conversation forward. Holy One, we are grateful for food on our table and clean water in our taps. Our hearts go out to those who do not have these things. We ask a special blessing on each and every person who's here with us, with their hearts open to hear the truth, which is hard. We bless each and every one of you on your journey through the truth to reconciliation. I ask these things in love and humility. Merci, miigwech. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. That was lovely. And such a beautiful way to really ask people to have open hearts and open minds. And this isn't it's a conversation. It's the beginning of a journey for many, for others, not the beginning at all, but I think it will be such an important step for many in our community as we move forward. And so I think that's an interesting segue. We'll start with the introductions for the panelists. And so, Gloria, you mentioned very, very briefly prior to your prayer, you spoke a little bit about your family history, but is there anything else you'd like to say as part of your introduction to our community?
Did you want me to tell my story?
Well, you know what? If you want to, you can do that
Well,
now.
sure.
Absolutely.
I love to. I would love to. As I told you before my prayer, my father was born in Manitoba, and you know, I think he fled poverty and prejudice and racism, and he hoped that coming to Ontario, his family, children could assimilate. But he was always a Métis guy. He hunted, he fished, he gardened, big gardens with vegetables for the winter. So that's really how he provided for us. Um, I, as a girl growing up, we were in a white neighborhood. I never heard the word Métis, although we used to have visitors sometimes who spoke in this French. My father said it was French, but I know now that he spoke Michif. I know because of the expressions that he used that, and also when I was studying French as a high school person, his French wasn't at all like mine at all. There were just sort of what I thought were errors. So I thought, well, it was maybe a low class French. I knew my dad was poor, and when he was growing up, we heard all about it. Anyway, um, I one day I was looking at a picture of my auntie, and I said to my dad, "Auntie Anna looks Indian, doesn't she, Daddy?" Wow, that was a no-no. He reacted so strongly and said, "Don't you ever say that, ever." So I knew right away, Auntie Anna's Indian. Okay. And I just kind of kept that knowledge inside of me. But I knew that there was as I grew older, that this was a very painful secret. And it wasn't only Auntie Anna that was Indian, it was my dad and all his family that were Métis. Uh, and as a girl, I really didn't like my dad and the way he provided for us. I was embarrassed when the car with the deer tied on. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but my dad was a really good hunter, and that's how he provided for us. By the time I was out of high school, I was pretty much colonized. I really didn't like um, my dad. I'm telling you, it just, yeah, there was a definite rift there, and certainly I have regrets about that. Um, it was, well, you know what? I have to say, there was a lot of drinking. My dad was a fiddler, a really good fiddler, and people came to my house a lot, and there was dancing and fiddling and jigging and drinking, and it caused a lot of harm in our family. So um, I suppose that was one. I just blame my dad for everything. However, years later, just by he was hired as the fiddler for uh, the Fort William had created the fort, had recreated the Northwest Company fort, and they needed a fiddler. So they hired my dad because he was pretty famous in Thunder Bay as a fiddler. And um, he, I don't think he realized, but they dressed him as a voyageur, which is, of course, our ancestors. They dressed him as a voyageur, and he went around playing the violin, and people danced and had a great time. And one day a woman came up to him and said, "Do you happen to know the Red River Jig?" Well, if any of you out there are Métis, the Red River Jig is a signature piece. It's every Métis knows that piece. And he said, "Sure, I know that piece." And he played it. And she said, "What's your name?" "Joe Harrison." And she said, "Who's your grandfather?" "Delphus Lynn Harrison." "That's my grandfather." So she had come up from the States to Thunder Bay to this fort to get some history and some background, and was looking for, of course, this person, my dad, was the lost cousin because on his birth certificate there was Antoine Harrison rather than Joe Harrison. But you know how names get in the Métis Nation, names get crisscrossed all the time. So she was delighted to find her cousin and the lost link to this family. And she had all of our history right out to the Lajemodiere family who came from Quebec and established a settlement in Red River. And so that's how I came to know. And of course, that the Lajemodiere family produced Louis Riel through the marriage of Louis Riel Sr. to one of their daughters. My ancestor, Thomas Harrison, married another daughter, and he and Louis played together as children. So, wow, it was it was a very profound experience for me because it was like, oh, that's why That's why we're the way we are. We were so different. We were so out of sync, I guess. Uh, so it took me a long time to reconcile all of that. I, you know, it wasn't until probably um, 15 years ago when things started to happen in my life around truth and reconciliation. The books started to come out, um, films and talking about residential schools. And I just did a big turnaround and became totally involved in. I was a blanket exercise facilitator. If any of you have done a blanket exercise, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's an interactive procedure of the truth that happened between uh, the Canadian government and Aboriginal peoples here in Canada on Turtle Island. So that I've been pretty much consumed by that and wending my way into elderhood. Yeah, you might ask, how do you get to be an elder? You just get old. And I celebrated my 80th birthday this year. So to say that I'm a knowledge keeper, wow, I did not live a true Métis life. And if you want to hear about or read about a really amazing life, it's Mariah Campbell, Half Breed. And we can give you that as a resource after. That was, uh, living on road allowance in shacks. After the resistance of 1885 in Batoche in Saskatchewan, when Louis Riel was captured and hung, the warrior who organized the troops, Gabriel Dumont, fled for his life to the States. Our people were without a leader. We lost the resistance. We were we were considered traitors, whether we were fighting with or without. I mean, not all Métis were for this resistance. Believe me, they were frightened. They were afraid. But all of them fled to further west, into a life of poverty. They had no land. The government had promised land that they never really received. And if they did receive it, it was scrubland that could hardly be farmed. And if they didn't have a good return of the land in 3 years, that land was reclaimed and they were chased away. So that was a very hard time for the Métis people. But we always managed to stay in community, which is something I've read a lot about. Um, these shacks were built together so that there was always grandma and grandpa and then the cousins, and the families managed to stay together and create communities. And that's how we survived. That's how we continue to play the Red River Jig and dance. Um, I think my time is up, so I'm going to.
Well, you started this well, and so we're going to continue the introductions with some family stories, and then we're going to do a little bit more. And I have some questions that I'm going to ask each of you, and I also want to point out that Gloria started something with the fiddle, but we're not finished with the fiddle yet at all. So stay tuned. Nope, no pun there. And Patricia, how about we move over to you? And Patricia, of course, is the founding director with our local organization, which is the Indigenous Solidarity and Awareness Network for Oxford. And maybe you could do a little bit of the same about your family story. We'll move over to Kim, and then we'll get to the history of the land, and then some truth and reconciliation. We have a lot to stay tuned for. But Patricia, you're up.
Bonjour, Nindish Nakaznin, Patricia Marshall, Isan Derester, Nish Mandawagkwe of Anishinaabe, Celtic, and German descent. For those of you who do not speak Anishinaabe-Moan, what I just said was, hello, my name is Patricia Marshall. I'm the director of ISAN, which is Indigenous Solidarity and Awareness Network of Oxford, and I'm a two-spirit woman of Anishinaabe or Ojibwe, Celtic, Irish, and German descent. My story is a lot of stories wrapped up into one. My journey with Truth and Reconciliation officially started 3 years ago when the recoveries were made in Kamloops, BC. I was watching the news with my children, as many of us were doing during the pandemic. And it came to my then 8-year-old's attention, if residential schools were still around, they could be one of those children. That hit home. And so as a family, we decided to start doing stuff and make sure that we are asking our community to actively participate on the path to truth and reconciliation. We began with collecting shoes and stuffed animals. We had 215 items, and we did a honorarium for them in front of the Catholic Church, where we met Kim Parker, who helped lead it. And then the numbers kept growing. There was more discoveries, more recoveries, and just the grief kept growing. I started explaining to my children more about their Métis heritage, as my ex-partner is Métis, also from Red River. And I wanted them to understand, to embrace their indigeneity, to be proud of it, to grow up being strong, proud Indigenous Kwe. And then through that journey, I started digging into my own family heritage, into my grandmother's line, discovering that we have a connection to Manitoulin Island through her father's line, distant, but still close enough to rekindle and make sure that we are honoring that. But the biggest impact on my life was when my children were removed from my care. It took me 1.5 years to get them back. And when we were doing this work, it kept playing in my head about the time my children were not in my care by government mandate, forced, no choice, didn't get to see them. And I just kept thinking about all of those moms and those dads and those kokums and those mushrooms and how they must have felt. And then I thought about all the children that never made it home, and that made it even worse. And it was just this constant churning of pain and just like empathy and just wanting to understand, wanting to help make some sort of difference. So we formed ESON. We put a call out into the community asking, this is bigger than us. This is something the whole community needs to do together. And we formed in 2021. We started doing an annual March for Truth and Reconciliation on September 30th, which is coming up on Saturday. We're doing our 3rd annual one this year. And it's just grown and grown since then. And through this, I've really been talking with my Uncle Blair, who is a 60s scoop survivor. My grandmother adopted him in the 60s. He is from Mishkegowman First Nations originally. And he grew up with my grandmother in Brampton and London, Ontario, disconnected without realizing his connections. Nobody really has realized this. And he's been teaching me language, making sure that I'm able to learn Anishinaabe and I'm able to teach my daughters, and I'm able to embrace that part of culture and heritage and just make sure that we're carrying this into the next generation. And I often hear about the 7th generation prophecy, where they talk about how 7 generations after contact, Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike are going to come together and work together to create better and do better and honor creation. And I really feel like that is starting to happen with people that have been assimilated, reconnecting to their Indigenous heritage and making sure that they carry that forward so that way it's not lost. And the people who have been indoctrinated and abused by the system that was cruel and unfair with residential schools in the 60s scoop, all of us working together, we're creating awareness and we're creating connections with our non-Indigenous allies and kin. And I just feel like we really are on the path towards that 7th generation, that 7th fire prophecy. Sorry, 8th fire. And so in a nutshell, I guess I've had several different aspects of life just kind of smack me in the face saying, wake up, girl, wake up. It's time to start your mission. My uncle has said I am a warrior, and that title is heavy. As Gloria said, like that's a heavy title to live up to, and to know that every day you need to be taking action for reconciliation, not just reconciliation. And so just making sure I'm constantly learning, constantly helping the people around me become aware, and also ensuring that I am teaching this legacy to my children to carry it on after me. They come to every event. They participate in everything I can do other than Zoom meetings because they can't do that. But just exposing the next generation of little warriors that they are strong little Kwe, and they're the ones who are going to carry this. Our children are our future. And the government systems try to eradicate that beauty, that resilience, that just amazingness, and they were not successful. Indigenous people are still here, resiliently resurging and just reconnecting to everything, and it's just absolutely beautiful. I am deeply honored to be sitting on this Zoom with people like Gloria and Kim, who have been doing this work for so long and taking the steps to honor and reconnect to their own heritage. And I hope one day that I can be as connected and as understanding of all of this as the two of you are. So miigwech for having me here and accepting me as part of your circle.
Thank you so much. Well, I loved everything you said, but I love reconciliation. Like that is so fantastic because it's not just a word, it really is. And we're going to hear more about that with the truth and reconciliation sort of learning. And we're going to come back to Patricia in a minute, who will give us a little bit of an Oxford overview of the land in which we're on. But I would like our final panelist to now introduce herself. So Kim is the CEO and the co-founder of Food Security Structures Canada. She is in Ingersoll and she brings her Métis heritage to her work here in Oxford and across not just Canada, but frankly across the world. And so, Kim, maybe you could share a little bit about your story, and then we'll move from there.
Okay,
Please.
sounds good. And you've got my pictures ready, do you, Kelly?
I do. Okay.
Oh, that's okay.
Yes.
So it's okay. You got a second
Okay.
here. I'm gonna tell my story. And thank you so much, Gloria, for starting us on the path of fiddlers. I have a story about fiddlers. So as Kelly mentioned, I am a resident of Ingersoll right now, but I was born and raised just in Southwest Oxford. So my family has a farm just south of Ingersoll. I was excuse me, and I'm going to say this using everyday phraseology. I was raised as a white kid in southwestern Ontario on a dairy farm. How much more Oxford can you get? And you know, we had no idea that there was any type of history there. Oxford County has the perception that we never had a residential school here. We never had a reserve here. There's no Indigenous people here. That was not within our frame of understanding, and it wasn't something I grew up with. And that all changed in 1992. My grandmother, Beatrice Parker, passed away. And our family, I have three amazing aunties. I have three wonderfully wild, crazy, eccentric aunties. And I love them all dearly. My Aunt Virginia is the youngest of them, and she's only 10 years older than I am. So we were very close growing up. When her mother passed, she struggled, and she's very open about this, that she felt lost, that there was something missing. And she started digging into our family history, and she tried to reach out. We knew we had family up in Southampton, and so we started doing some digging up there. My great grandmother and great grandfather ran the Walker House Hotel. If anybody's been up to Southampton, Walker House Hotel still continues on the main street in Southampton. They started running that in about 1913, but there was no history before that. We had no idea where the family came from. We'd heard that there maybe was something to do with being a little bit Scottish, maybe, and that's all we knew. And then all we had was a family picture. I'm going to ask Kelly to share it.
Segue?
That's the segue. I apologize. I had problems with my computer the other day, and I didn't want to risk the challenge here. But this was the only thing that we really had tying us to our history. And all we knew was that my great grandmother, Lillian, is the baby sitting on the gentleman's lap there. We knew that Aunt Chrissy, her younger sister, is the baby on the far right. And that's all we knew. We didn't know anything else about our family. And obviously my aunt, our whole family was, very saddened by this. She felt at an end in trying to understand what this was all about. So fast forward a couple of years, and my other aunt, Lois, who is a teacher in Toronto, and I'm going to share some really crazy little details here so that you get the context of what happened. So Lois is a teacher. She goes to take the streetcar to come home. This was in about 1994. It was about 2 years after Grandma passed. So Lois was coming home from school. She missed the bus that she normally would take, her normal streetcar bus combination. She got home a little bit late. She doesn't normally sit down on the couch when she arrives home, but that night, for whatever reason, she sat down on the couch. And she turned the TV on and she started flipping channels. And we were talking about that moment of just flipping channels and how, random things can show up. And she was scooting through channels, and all of a sudden she saw this. She went past it and then came back to it. there was a film playing on CBC. And in that moment of her watching this film, and it's only about a half an hour film, she caught what is less than 1 minute of footage in that film. And this is what she saw. And Kelly, if you could pull it up,
Okay. It should be on the screen now for folks to see.
that showed up on her TV screen. It's the same picture. So she immediately contacted my other aunt. There was a flurry of phone calls. They reached out to the National Film Board, and this picture started us on the journey. The gentleman in this film, his name is Ray Spencer. He's Ray Spencer from James Bay. And so long story short, and it is a very long story, my aunt ended up going up to Chisasibi, up to the James Bay area, literally met cousins up there that went, oh my God, you are the lost Spencers. So the family, so you can pull that picture down now, Kelly. The family had left. So the gentleman, the older gentleman in that picture is my great-great-grandfather, Miles Spencer, and he and his family left Moosonee, Moose Factory area, and traveled down to Southampton in about 1900, which coincidentally was the year that the residential school opened in Moosonee. So he took his family and they left Southampton, or left Moosonee, came to Southampton, and proceeded to start a fresh life there and a new life there. And the family history was erased, because to be able to come and raise his children and to go to a regular school and to, by all perceptions, be mainstream, the family avoided the children having to go to residential school. So my Aunt Virginia has spent many years now, and I've been part of that journey that we've been, she's done 90% of the work. I'm just tagging along on the end of it, but researching our family. Our family goes back to the original Hudson Bay Company, folks that came over. And as we were going through, and you talk about finding cousins in Red River, our cousin Donna Sutherland wrote this book about my great-great-great-grandmother, Nahaway, who married one of the original Hudson Bay settlers that came over. And we have the whole family history going back to the 1700s now because of it. We have cousins all over the place. It really did start a journey for our family. So when I look at, the context of this conversation tonight, so what does that mean for everyone, and what has it meant for me? My company, Food Security Structures Canada, we do controlled environment agriculture, and it's specifically a system that can go into the far north to help address food insecurity in remote communities. It can handle all the crazy weather that Canada throws at it, but we also work around the world, and particularly on a project in Australia, where it is absolutely horrible but fascinating that their experience with residential schools is exactly the same. They were colonized just like we were. So it is really, it's been a really interesting experience for me to bring my Indigenous heritage to the project. I am very careful to make sure everyone understands I claim my Métis heritage. I am not Métis. It is not a path that I have walked. My connections are not as close as Gloria's and some other Métis individuals. My husband and I lived out in Fort McMurray for a number of years. There are active Métis communities there. I look forward to being able to go up to the James Bay area and to meet my cousins and to reconnect with family. But I honor my heritage is the focus that I have. And my biggest passion is to be able to reestablish the voice of the women. History is often told by men, and it is told by the conqueror. And it has been a real journey for myself to start to explore the voices of those women and to understand what their lives looked like and how that has informed where we are now and where we are going to go forward. So I know there are a number of people, hundreds, if not thousands of them all across Canada, who have similar stories because I've met them. And the CBC element of it makes my story different, but all of us have stories of how we've reconnected to lost histories like that. So
And there's a single thread certainly through all three. And before I have some questions certainly that I want to ask, but I think Gloria might have had her hand up. Gloria, did you have a question for Kim? Oh, you're on mute. Because what Zoom meeting is complete without someone saying that phrase? Still mute. You're still muted, Gloria. Can you hear?
I'm so sorry. The book that you showed on the screen, who was
Yes.
the author?
her name is Donna Sutherland. She is one of my cousins through the branches in the family. She is a researcher and a historian. And this book was published, I believe, in 2008, I believe, but it is difficult to get. Sorry, 2009. But it shows, it has a lot of the history of the Red River area and the original settlers. So
You
I'm
know,
happy
my grandmother's name is Sutherland. That's why I asked.
right.
Uh,
There we go.
we're
Everybody's
cousins.
related, right? Right?
Everybody's
Exactly.
related.
And
You
we are
know
all
what? It is
family.
a small world, isn't
It
it?
is.
And
It
I
is.
just
Yes,
love
it
how
is.
all three of you have
We'll
really
talk.
reclaimed and embraced your heritage and
Nahaway
want
had
to share.
14 children, so there really is a chance that we are related.
Probably.
And
I would
so,
be delighted, Kim.
So I'm going to now just to move things along. One of the things that we wanted to do tonight was sort of, and someone has mentioned this in the opening about Oxford historically, because we didn't have a residential school, because we may not have the same supports or community connections as our neighbors. So we certainly know Brant and London and area. We're surrounded, but a little bit isolated. And I think for some, we've heard through the years that even though we were surrounded, that people thought, well, we don't have an Indigenous population here. And when we talk about whether it's Truth and Reconciliation or other things, it's maybe not as relevant for Oxford, or people don't think of us as having that history or that connection. And certainly we do have that history and that connection, both to the land and to the original the Indigenous community who was here from the beginning of time, but certainly even through the most recent past. And so Patricia's going to give us just a little bit of an overview of Oxford's history specifically, so that we can dispel that myth that this is not an Oxford thing. And I will just also say that above and beyond that, we do have history and there is an Oxford connection. There is a Canadian connection, and as a Canadian, we all have responsibility and connection to this as well. But wearing that Oxford lens, Patricia, would you just like to share a little bit about the land we're on and who walked on it before us?
To do so. So let's go back over 15,000 years to a time when the landscape was very different than it is now. Giant ice sheets towering over plains of flora and fauna with scattered forests, glacier rivers, and lakes. This landscape housed multitudes of ecological diversity. Sadly, many of these species have gone extinct, many as a direct result of colonial impact, and are no longer part of our ecodiversity today. These lands are also inhabited by the ancestors of Turtle Island's Indigenous people, individuals with direct blood ties to the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Attawandaron peoples that lived when colonial ancestors made it to these shores, and people who still live here to this day. We have scientific documentation that proves that what is now known as Oxford County was home to ancestral game trails of many animals, including mammoths. Yes, mammoths. Modern-day Ingersoll is home to one of these giants' remains, with evidence of Turtle Island's Indigenous people hunting them on this territory up to 15,000 years ago. The farmlands which intertwine within and surround Oxford County are also sources of historic finds, with arrowheads and other tools dating back thousands to hundreds of years ago, found in several of them all around the county. This is further proof of Indigenous peoples' resilience and residence in this area since time immemorial. In Tillsonburg, you can find the remains of the largest Attawandaron settlement in southwestern Ontario and the ancestral burial ground for these people. Although the Attawandaron people eventually amalgamated into the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, they were avid agriculturalists and tended to these lands. They lived responsibly, rotating their settlements about every 30 years as to ensure they did not exhaust the natural resources of the region. So although the colonial world likes to stand on the idea that because Indigenous people would transition living locations, this made them less civilized and somehow negated their claims to exist here, when instead it shows societal maturity to be responsible citizens of the land. This can be explained further by what most people know as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which was actually appropriated off of the Blackfoot people. The original theory by the Blackfoot Confederacy explains that when the needs of the people are met, then the society itself is able to advance up the hierarchy of needs and live in harmony with its surroundings, no longer needing to focus on survival and war, but able to instead develop deep spiritual connections, as the Indigenous people of Turtle Island did. You can find many more examples of history in the songs and stories passed down through the generations, documenting ancestral memories of creation, tradition, history, and so much more. Although these ways of passing down history is valid, I'm aware that to Western society, spoken word may not carry the same weight. And so I would like to present to you some examples of written word by Indigenous people dating back over 10,000 years in the Great Lakes region, including Oxford County. Anishinaabe people used birch bark scrolls, also known as Wigawasabik, and they use these to document medicine, protocol, historical events, songs, and more. And the Haudenosaunee also used wampum belts with shells as mnemonic devices to record things such as political and diplomatic agreements, occurrences, practices, and more. These also date back thousands of years. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy, consisting of the Mohawk, Cayuga, Oneida, Seneca, Onondaga, and Tuscarora First Nations, formed approximately in the 11th century and used the lands of Oxford County as partner in the Dish with One Spoon Treaty with creation itself and the Anishinaabe peoples of the Three Fires Confederacy, consisting of the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa peoples, sharing resources and responsibility of this region. The Anishinaabe referred to this agreement as Gnogadanya. This is an open agreement to care for this region in concert without interference in the other's way of life. This agreement is still in place to this day, and both the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe confederacies have stated they would be happy to accept Canada into this agreement if it were to so choose. Today, we thank the Haudenosaunee for our governing systems, as they were directly modeled from the diplomatic strategies implemented by these nations to deal with disputes and relations. Another example of Indigenous history having direct impact on our lives here in Oxford County. The direct founding of our community was thanks to Ganyaganaga guides, or Mohawk guides, who helped the colonists who came here to understand how to survive on this land and taught practices regarding agriculture, including the cultivation of corn and pumpkins, which are still harvested in this region to this day. Without these guides, I would like to note that Oxford County would never have flourished to what it is now. After contact, many things quickly changed for Indigenous people, and the colonial world played dirty to ensure they destabilized the Indigenous people of Turtle Island. They did this in several ways. Oxford County became known as part of the Upper Canada Treaties under the colonial imposed treaty system, registered under the Great Lakes and London Township Treaties, which allowed farmland and communities to begin to sprout up in this region. I would like to note that these treaties were not signed by all Indigenous nations which had responsibilities to the land of this region. Also, the concept of handing over ownership of land is not something supported by Indigenous worldviews, as we are intimately connected to the ecological responsibilities of the region which we inhabit. We have land stewardship responsibilities that we are supposed to undertake, and this can be proven by our totem systems or clan systems, which, if you take the time to look into, very interesting. The intention of these treaties was to be an agreement between equal sovereign nations. However, as we all know, colonial powers did not historically respect Indigenous sovereignty, and they still don't. Therefore, the legitimacy of these treaties should be questioned. especially when you consider that the only legal basis colonials had for striking was based upon the recently repudiated doctrine of discovery, along with the historical concept of terra nullius, which stated that land inhabited by non-Christians was allowed to be colonized in the name of God. In the early 1800s, the true intentions of Canada came to light with the creation of the Indian residential school system, and even more so with the implementation of the Indian Act in 1876, which is a federal law which regulates Indigenous people to nothing more than wards of Canada, with no more reason or ability than how the colonial world views children. This act displaced Indigenous people to reserves where they legally were required to remain, and implemented a status program which dictated your claim to Indigenous heritage by means of bud quantum of a specific nation. This act also is what legally mandated Indigenous children to attend residential schools from age 4 to 16. In the early 1800s, surrounding Oxford County, we had two schools pop up. The Mount Elgin Industrial School, which was located on the Chippewa of the Thames First Nations near St. Thomas, and the Mohawk Institute, located in what we now know as Brantford, both mere stone throws away. These schools acted as boarding schools for Indigenous children for nearly 150 years, and as some of the longest and oldest operating residential schools in our country. Children in these schools faced horrific abuse at the hands of their educators. Many tried to run away to family members who lived in our hometowns of Oxford County, only to be returned to these institutions by OPP and Ingersoll police, where they would be imprisoned in cells for approximately 1 week, regardless of age. And I'd like to once again point out that this is children anywhere from the age of 4 to 16 years old. Hundreds more of these children would die within the walls of these schools, buried in both marked and unmarked graves. Ingersoll, doing its due diligence to honor the TRC's recommendations for municipalities, has uncovered records of the police returning children to the Mohawk Institute, and will be sending these records to the National Center of Truth and Reconciliation in Winnipeg. I encourage all municipalities within Oxford County to do the same. Our warden, Marcus Ryan, often reiterates the phrase and sentiment that we are all treaty people. This means responsibility and actively working towards understanding the truth and participating in reconciliation. Recently, Oxford County's strategic plan was released, and this includes plans for reconciliation, including building relations with neighboring Indigenous nations, as well as to support the #1 priority in the Safe and Well Oxford Plan, which is everyone to feel like they belong. This must include Indigenous people of Oxford County as well. I hope that this synopsis helps to illuminate the fact that Indigenous people have and still do live in Oxford County, and have called this region home. In a nutshell, this is why truth and reconciliation matters here.
I have to tell
You're muted
myself,
now, Kelly.
I know, I had to tell myself that. Thank you, Patricia, for that history, because I think for those that maybe haven't, taken the time yet themselves to research, it's really good to know a little bit about the history of the land right here in Oxford County. And your segue to Truth and Reconciliation and the report is perfect, because Gloria is going to talk a little bit about what the Truth and Reconciliation, what that journey was. And of course, we can't go through we can't go through all of the 94 calls to action, but we're going to pick a couple, and Gloria is going to share a little bit before we move into the next section. So Gloria, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Before I begin, I just want to make, I guess, a kind of an observation. We're listening to the truth. What Patricia has just gone through is a truth, and truth is difficult to hear. And sometimes, it stays in your head, the truth. Okay, I know that, I just learned it tonight. But if it doesn't go down to your heart, then it blocks you. So, you may be getting a lot of truth tonight in our talk, and that's why we're here, because this is about truth. We want you to know the truth, because before we can move into reconciliation, the truth has to be a part of, as Patricia said, there's a responsibility, and as Kelly has also said, there's a responsibility when you know the truth. Are you going to live your life differently now that you know the truth? Maybe not. maybe you'll say, okay, tick that box off. Yeah, I learned about that. But if it's not moving you to action, it's reconciliation. And I do love that term that has been used this evening. So I don't want to frighten you with the history story, but I do, some people may be asking themselves, what the heck is truth and reconciliation? So I'm just going to give you a little 10-minute, you can take notes if you want. Indigenous people have been struggling for decades to be heard by the federal government about their issues. Clean water, housing, education, fewer bucks for the children in healthcare. There's so many issues, and they've been struggling for a long time. And more recently, in the 90s and late 80s, the thing that became very big was the residential schools. And I'm here to tell you that it was the most heinous crime ever. And I find it difficult to say I'm proud to be Canadian because of that. How could that be? So that became the biggest issue. In probably 90 something, 92 or 3, there was a commission, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples of Canada. And they went from, all across Canada, special commission made up of Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, interviewing communities of Indigenous people. They brought together 140 recommendations called the Royal Commission, and they presented it to the government, and nothing was done. The government picked it up and put it on a shelf. The only good thing that I can think of that came out of that was Kairos got involved and created the blanket exercise. But it didn't really catch on until the 2015 Truth and Reconciliation. So the poor old Truth and Reconciliation, or those fellows that had worked so hard for this to become a reality, the Royal Commission in 1996, they got tired and a new commission was formed. And this one was quite a powerhouse. There were, and this started in 2008, I believe, 2009. 3 commissioners. There was Marie Wilson, who's a journalist from the North. She's a non-Indigenous. The other person was Wilton Littlechild, who is a chief and a lawyer from Alberta. And then there was the Honorable Murray Sinclair, who was the chair of the commission. And he sat on the Supreme Court of Canada. Those 3 people worked for 5 years. They went from east through Canada to the west, interviewing people who had attended residential school and were ready to tell their truth. There was a readiness with this commission. It was just in the air. It was electrical. So they taped and videoed all of these people, documented every story, and came up with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was put out in 2015. That's almost 10 years ago. Wow, it just seems like yesterday. I remember being riveted to the television set during that time. Murray Sinclair is such an elegant speaker, and he was the spokesperson for this Truth and Reconciliation. And since that time, I think there has been a big move forward. When Patricia refers to the 7th fire, that's another story, but we're not going to tell that tonight. You have to call us back. will tell you. You can look up the prophecy of the eight fires, but it was like the seventh fire was burning because that at that time, the elders were for the last probably 20 years, 30 years, the elders have started to speak again and tell about the things that they lost and bring them forward and take the ceremonies that were outlawed and renew them and teach them. And so there's this big action happening. I'm so grateful and humbled to to think that I'm a part of that with all of these people here getting that fire and kindling it. So that's the history of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Since that time, you can Google Murray Sinclair, and he's got probably dozens of interviews that you can find out more about what it was. So this is, and so then there was the day of, the Canada made an official day called the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, which is also Orange Shirt Day. And that story of that little girl, yes, oh, the little girl who had to lose her shirt and never got it back, that story touched our hearts. But nothing touched Canada's hearts more than the discovery. In 2015, we knew about residential schools. Yep, got it here. Yeah, that was terrible. But nothing moved us the way the discovery of those little graves, it moved Canada. A couple of years ago on Canada Day, it was coast to coast. People with orange shirts were rallying, walking in the streets. It was a moment of reconciliation. That's what reconciliation feels like. Everybody moving together forward. We don't want to stay back here. We don't want to stay in guilt. We don't want to stay in the sadness. But you need to hear the story. And then we can go forward into the eighth fire. And I think that's all I need to say about Truth and Reconciliation. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer if I can. Thanks.
Gloria, thank you for that. And I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. But I think when you opened, you mentioned about it's one thing to learn, it's another thing to have it in your heart and to really hear it there. And when you at the very end, that was your beginning, and at the very end, when you spoke about about Canada really being so connected and deeply heartbroken over the discovery of the graves. That really seems to have been a shift, certainly that I have seen. And when you look at the orange shirts for Every Child Matters, and this coming week through ISAN here in Ingersoll, we have the wonderful opportunity to have a march to embrace and learn more through a gathering of our community. And I highly recommend, if people are able to attend, please join in. But would someone like to maybe just quickly speak to the Every Child Matters and the story of the orange shirt, because it is, again, one that truly does touch your heart.
It does. I know. Do any of you know her name?
Because
Phyllis Webstand.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Patricia, you got it.
Phyllis Webstand was her name.
Thank you.
And there's 2 books out now. There's With Our Orange Hearts and the Orange Shirt Story.
And her story has touched any of us who grew up, kind of lower middle class, maybe. I remember, in my home, I had to wear my sister's hand-me-downs. I never, hardly ever got something new. And so this story really touched me because when I got something new, I treasured it. And when she got that new shirt to wear for her first day of school, Phyllis, she was so proud and so excited. And when she got there, I know this, probably somebody could probably do the story better, but I know that they were stripped, they were showered in cold water, their hair was some horrible solution in it to kill, sort of to delouse, and their hair was cut off. And they had to stand in line, cold, no towel, until every child was showered and deloused and haircut. And then they were led up to the dormitory where they slept and cried all night. She lost that shirt. That shirt was taken away from her, and she was given a nightgown to put on. And she never saw that shirt again. And that's her story. The two books that you might want to put in the chat for people to read her story, because it's very touching. And she started a whole movement around that story. She was the person who started the Orange Shirt Day, I believe, the actual design. And yeah, so now we're all wearing orange shirts for Phyllis and all the little people
I think
that
what's
suffered.
I think
Yes.
that's what's really exciting about that opportunity too is the momentum that has brought forward. So the first Orange Shirt Day was in 2021. I really think, and I guess Patricia, you brought this up, that year was so pivotal in the awareness of the average Canadian, understanding that story came out and was being told. The orange shirt was becoming a symbol of the action item. So, we talk about the Truth and Reconciliation report. Well, what went with this report, which I think took it beyond that Royal Commission, was that there were action
Yes.
items.
Yes.
And that's where I think this gets really powerful, is that there's the opportunity to participate in this. It's not just a report that got stuck up on a shelf like so many of them have.
Oh, right.
And that,
Yeah.
The fact that we all recognize National Reconciliation Day, that is a response to, and I had to look it up. I couldn't remember the number. I'm sorry, my mind isn't as sharp as I would love to think it is. It's called to action number 80. And it specifically it calls upon the government to create a holiday on that day so that it is rooted the same as every other important date in our history, that we want to stop and pause. And then to add Phyllis's orange shirt to that added a visual element to it. And I'm so glad so many of the orange shirts have added the Every Child Matters, which is the next piece of that, is recognizing that so many of these children went to the schools and never came home. And that the Every Child Matters gives voice and recognizes they existed. And we have to recognize who they were, and they symbolize how important those children are. And for us now to recognize that, I think it's so important that those three stories have all come together to add so much power to this week and to the activities that are happening on the week. So
I think it's a call to action number 53 or 54. Forgive me if I have it wrong. But it talks about how not to leave this to your government or your religious institutions to take it upon themselves to work towards truth and reconciliation action, but that it is on to the individual person to take steps and work towards it also. And when Gloria was explaining that first night residential school, all I could think about is this is what our parents told us growing up jail was like and why to follow the rules.
Yeah, the
Mhm.
And we were
boogeyman.
throwing children into institutions like this for 100 years. And we
50
want to
years.
act like it's not something to work towards correcting, reconciling, and moving forward so it never happens again.
Yeah. And it's
And
a
it,
good point, Patricia, that, this report, those calls to action, they're not just calls to action to the government. They are
no,
calls to action to people, to business owners, to social clubs, to municipal governance. Every level, every Canadian, every organization has a role to play as we move forward, and they've been articulated. And I had so many people reach out to me because we all were in pain when we heard about these unmarked graves and these children. We couldn't deny that they existed and that this had happened. And so many good Canadians were trying to figure out, so what do I do? I don't know what to do. And the first thing I would say is, well, education's one, but start with the Truth and Reconciliation report, because that report was written and guided by Indigenous people. They
Yes.
told you what they needed you to do. It was very clear. You now need to take the time, and as Patricia, I love the word, reconciliate action. But the first thing you have to do is learn the truth. And that's been the really hard part, I think, for a lot of people, is facing the truth.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. Actually, there were 6 parts there were 6 categories to the calls to action. So I don't think I really elaborated very much about that. But with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there were 94 calls to action. And the first few were child welfare, education, a few on language and culture, some on health, some on justice. And I do believe the last part of that was called reconciliation. So there were the action parts, the reconciliation parts of the 94. Now they're daunting to read, I have to tell you. You can't just sit down and read them.
No, it's a big book. It's a big book.
No, yeah. And there is a site called, gosh, I'll try to get it for the chat. It's called the 94 the 94 calls to action, but they take one action at a time. So you read it and then read the background behind it, why it's being called. For example, on education, so they need better schools on reserves, for example, and more dollars poured into that. And then they'll give the background of no schools or terrible schools, rat infested, and then what the action would be, and what the call is, and to whom they are calling. So and they also give, funnily enough, the steps that have been taken to correct or to respond to the call. So it's an excellent resource, and I'll try and get it for you before the end of our conversation.
fantastic.
I
Because
hope
we
we're
are
not
sharing.
overwhelming.
No,
Hope we're
but
not overwhelming folks.
I have to believe that those that are joining us this evening, and those that will have an opportunity to join over the coming years, as they reflect back on this and get a chance to again, we talked about this as the beginning of a learning journey, and we really do want to promote that learning, understanding the truth really is understanding history, understanding what actions we each can take, what we can and should be doing. It really matters. And there's so many ways. So there's a number of resources that are in the chat box now. There are a number of others, still to be put up. But it really does matter that each of us take a responsibility as part of this action and part of our our commitment to this work, to this importance, to our community, to our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers, our families.
I'd really like to put another resource out there too for
Please
those
do.
people who may have already taken the time to read the 94 calls to action. There's also the MMIW final report, which stands for Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women. I'd also like to add on the fact that this should include Girls of Two-Spirit people also, but the report is titled the MMIW Final Report, and it goes into great detail about the losses that Indigenous people have been experiencing, especially with our female and gender diverse populations. Over 4,000 women lost on the Highway of Tears alone. I see Kelly pointing at her red dress pin. Currently, you'll
I was
see in media, they're talking about search the landfill, and you might see posts floating around social media saying reconciliation is searching the landfill. And this is because there's Indigenous women's bodies being left in the landfill by the Premier of Manitoba, who's actually running on a platform saying, I will not search the landfill for her election campaign currently. So we are selling these red dress pins, and part of the proceeds are going to be going to help support boots on the ground like Camp Morgan. That are standing there making sure that they are not putting more garbage on top of these women's remains as we demand that they be paid proper respect. And I just oftentimes the issue of MMIW gets forgotten and swept under the rug. We spend September talking about Orange Shirt Day and residential schools, and not that residential schools haven't had a profound impact, but a spillover effect of this has been MMIW. And MMIW is something that has been historically glorified by our media companies like Disney with the movie Pocahontas, which should be actually Makato. There's lots of examples of other ways that you can further your reading. It does not stop with the 94 calls to action, and I hope people don't think that it should stop there. There's
No.
also Grassy Narrows right now fighting for against unsafe mining practices in the Ring of Fire. They are causing toxic water, so children are growing up generations never having clean water to shower or brush their teeth, eat, boil water for tea. There's just countless things that are to be looked into. The
right.
journey does not stop.
No, it is an important journey, and everyone should find their way to the journey and learn at their pace. I do want to give, and again, there's connections here and links. I do want to just make a point to mention, in particular, the University of Alberta Indigenous Canada course is a free course to take. I think if you want a certificate, there's a little fee if you choose to, if you want that. Otherwise, it is a free course. You can do it at your own pace. It is really quite fantastic. And while I will say that it has been a few years since I was in grade school, and perhaps I don't remember grade school history particularly well, and I'm sure that's true. I also think I didn't learn so much of what I learned in that course, or was not at a stage or an age where it would resonate. So really great history. Kim, I see you're shaking your head. Do you want to
I
jump
love
in
that
there?
course. Yeah, I cannot promote that course enough. Give it an endorsement. Dan Levy from Schitt's Creek took the course and pumped that out through his socials because he said it changed his life as well. Again, Canadian kid growing up and the perspective that shared. I believe last time I checked, it was like $65 or something if you want the certificate, which I did because I felt that it was really important to support the program. The prof at the university has changed since that course was done. Tracy Bear was the one that was leading it. It is now the head of that department is this amazing lady, Chelsea Vowell. So when I had somebody ask, I saw in the chat that somebody was asking, is the 94 calls to action, is that where you should start? I would suggest that it's good to familiarize yourself with the 94, especially if you're in a leadership role anywhere. I think they're really important for that. But if you're looking for some place to start, for me, it's always about the history and understanding. If you've got time to do the course, there Really wonderful videos. They're really
Mhm.
great to understand. My husband and I did it together. We made the commitment of doing it together every Sunday night. We did one of the modules. And so it was a journey that we did together. And I would highly recommend that to anybody. The next thing I would recommend, though, is this book, and it's called Indigenous Rights, and that's in the chat. It is by Chelsea Bowell. She is a Métis woman from Northern Alberta. I love this book. I have given this book away many, many times. I love her writing style. She writes like a blogger. It's so easy to understand. She uses common phraseology. She is a law major and a history professor, but she writes social media style. It's very easy to follow, to understand, and to really. And I think some of the topics she covers are fantastic. Like, what do we call us? What Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, Inuit? Like, what does that? What are all those Aboriginal? Why are we
That
not
was
using
one of my
Indian,
questions.
right? Why are we not using the word Indian? She
Mhm.
dives into all of this with such a wonderful sense of humor. She said it really doesn't matter what you call us as long as you don't call us late for dinner, right? That's the type of style that she has. So for me, that would be one of my first places I would recommend somebody to go to, because you're going to get the truth. She covers some hard topics too. Okay, don't get me wrong. She dives into the tough stuff, but she also handles it with such a wonderful style that it will be a good starting point for anyone.
That's lovely. Gloria, you have something to
I
add.
do. I've been doing this a long time. I'm so sorry, Kim.
That's
What you
okay.
have to say is so important, and I so appreciate having the title of this book, because, just frankly, I have put down. It's called Reconciliation Thunder, and I put it in the chat here. Oh, Reconciliation Thunder. Yeah, with the link. I think that might, if you want to sort of familiarize yourselves with what it is, to go to that site and do a couple. To read them all, I don't recommend it as a start.
Mhm.
That's something that's going to take a bit of time. But I certainly recommend books. And this course by the University of Alberta sounds just amazing. So really, just look around, and the library at this week has a lot of Indigenous writers' books out. So you can just pick one up and have a look, read it. For the young people, I think there's The Marrow Thieves was quite a popular book for young people. It was a science fiction about Indigenous. But before we move on, I really would like to just make mention of the impact of residential schools and the intergenerational uh, difficulties with Indigenous people, because there's so many stereotyping in our heads that have gone on for a long time. You know, uh, why don't they just move in and get a job? Why don't they just leave? Why do they want to live up north? I mean, there's so many, stereotyping. We see a native person on the sidewalk, and there's immediately, they're all drunks. They're all, it's it's such a painful thing to be stereotyped. I don't, there's all kinds of stereotyping that we do, but particular with Indigenous people, that is a no-no. When you think that 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 individual's mother grew up in a residential school, never heard the word love, never heard I love you, never was hugged, and didn't know how to hug her children and love her children. And that goes on and on.
Mhm.
And when Murray Sinclair says it's going to take 7 generations to heal that, I believe it. I believe that that's going to be, and we need to be kind. There's We need to be open-hearted and kind to that kind of intergenerational violence and dysfunction. That's what do you do when your children are taken away from you? What do you do when you lose those are your children. You are the mother. You teach them, you nurture them, you sing them the songs, and they're gone from you. I can't imagine anything more painful.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to make a point of that.
Thank you, Gloria. You're right. The that trauma has consequences. It's unbearable trauma. Mhm. And I, I so hate to bring our time to a close,
What?
because we haven't even gotten to our questions.
Mhm.
But we've had such a fantastic conversation, and we've learned and we've shared, and I think I can speak for myself, and I feel very confident speaking for others that are joining us, have opened our hearts. And as we wrap up, I certainly want to again mention that on Saturday, the 30th of September, in Ingersoll, through ISAM, will be the Truth and Reconciliation March, and a wonderful learning opportunity. But through that day, if I could certainly give a shout out, it is not just a day, another day. It is a day to reflect, to learn, and to act. And so, whether acting can look like a lot of things, it can be attending the march, bringing your family, your children, learning something. You can donate, commit to supporting an Indigenous-led organization, or supporting, again, some work that really matters in our community. Wear an orange shirt. Again, that's one thing you can do. Buy the red dress button to support the work that's going on. Learn more. Listen if you want to listen to the radio. Heart FM for the day, along with many radio stations across the country, are doing a day to listen. I think this is maybe the third year that they go all day, and they are really sharing stories. They're talking about culture. They're talking about Indigenous art and creation, and individual stories. They are sharing so much, certainly topical, historical, all kinds of things. It is a great learning opportunity. Read a book. So take action, right? We've now given you a list of many books. Just pick
And
one to get started.
if
But
you're
it,
not a reader, there are tons of visual resources also.
good
There's
point.
APTN, Lumi. There's lots of stuff on Apple TV. You can find there's a whole section on Prime that's Indigenous documentaries. I'd recommend True History on there. So yeah.
So I'm so sorry that we didn't even begin to scratch the surface, but I want to thank each and every one of you, Patricia, Kim, Gloria, sharing your family stories, of which I really wanted to delve a little deeper in, to talk specifically around some of the assimilation and the trauma that brought within your families. And so I'm going to say next time we'll go a little bit deeper, and we'll have some more opportunity. But meanwhile, for those that are joining us, please take it upon yourselves to actively learn, to search out, to do your part, to be a voice that really matters for truth and reconciliation, and now reconciliation. And that matters across our country, and it certainly matters here in Oxford County. So thank you for joining us, for everyone at home and everyone who will watch this at work or at home later. These Community United conversations really are intended to shine a light to open up dialogue and learning and conversations. This is a casual kind of kitchen table conversation. Please have the same kind of conversation at home. It's a great opportunity to do so. I would like to, again, as I said, thank each of our guests for sharing their story and opening their heart and sharing their wisdom. And I would also like to thank our sponsor, Adam Shaw Professional Corporation. And Adam and Brent were gracious to help ensure that we could do this very, very important conversation for this month. And we are grateful that we had that opportunity. And I promise you, we will do another follow-up at some a later date, because this really matters. This is part of our work as a United Way, and certainly part of our work as citizens here in our community. So thank you everyone for joining us. Please have a lovely evening. Ladies, we have maybe 1 minute, but if you would like to say anything as a farewell, I will let you have the last words.
Hinagi Vizmandashi, Manawa Gazman, Ambidash Ga, Manawa Gazyan. We came to be happy, so go be happy.
Oh, that's lovely.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm going to let Gloria have the last word, so I'm going to sneak mine in ahead.
Okay.
I'm going to just a brief comment on what Kelly said about I'm hoping that what folks can take away from this conversation is empathy. I'm hoping that based on the things that Gloria shared with us, and when we see the people around us and we make an assumption and we judge them, I hope that your research and your learning and your own personal journey, that you will learn to maybe have a little more empathy and understanding why some people out there are struggling, and where that trauma came from, and the responsibility that we all need to have for the journey that they are on, and then to help be part of that solution.
Oh, that's so beautiful, Kim. Thank you. And for you from Patricia. I just have one thing. I just want to say that I'm so grateful to my dad and his ancestors, because it made me who I am, and I'm glad I'm me. And next time you hear a Native joke that's mean, or a comment, how will you act? What will be your response? And that's a really tough question, because when your buddy, is telling some horrible joke or making some awful comment, how will you react? And, I think just as beginners, the best thing we can do is not laugh. Just give them some silence. That's pretty powerful. So just in case you were wondering what you would do, good night. Good night, you wonderful ladies. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Miigwech. Be well.
Miigwech.
I need to.